All right, hang on. Okay.
Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak.
Today we discuss the death of SeaWorld trainer Dawn Brancheau and what we've learned in the aftermath. Could her death have been avoided?
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. To find out how you can be part of the movement, head over to thedarkoak.com or stay with us until the end of the episode and we will give you all the details.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. As you know, today's case is something a little different for me.
It is, and you know why I like this? This is a bit inspired by our own experiences.
It is. Listeners, in case you don't already know this, my co-host Stephanie is pretty much a rock star. She's one of those, she doesn't know I'm going to say this either. She's one of those women who can do everything and do it all pretty well. So in addition to being the head chicken whisperer on her homestead and hosting a growing podcast and being a wife and a supermom, Stephanie also organized a sleepover at SeaWorld for a group of 20 elementary aged children and their parents?
24 was our final number.
24. Wow. And I was lucky enough to be able to go to this sleepover and bring my 7-year-old. And it was such a special experience for us that we are going to remember forever. And then as a side note, just to make it even more adorable, Stephanie and I realized after the fact that when we were just a little older than our own kids are now, we were going on overnight field trips together. So it really was like this full circle moment.
It was really precious. I really think about that a lot.
Me too.
I was like, how sweet is it that we're still, as close as we are and we're getting to now do experiences over again, but like with our own kids. I mean, it's so small town and charming, and I love it. And you made me blush with all that other stuff. So
it's
very,
true.
it's very kind.
It's all true. All true. And this field trip really was awesome. If you have ever been to SeaWorld or if you have ever watched the 1983 cult classic Jaws 3D, you are probably familiar with SeaWorld's Shark Tunnel. Although it's not exactly like it was in Jaws 3D. Have you seen the movie?
No, I've never seen Jaws 3D.
Girl, you are missing out.
It's like a modern remake of like Jaws?
Well, it's 1983. So
okay, so not too modern.
It's the third in the sequel, and it's 3D, and it's terrible. I mean, terrible.
Where do you even view this now?
I wouldn't even know. Maybe.
Where did you view it?
Well, I watched it when I was a kid, right before I went to SeaWorld.
Well, that is terrifying.
Well, that's kind of my MO, but I know you can probably watch it on YouTube, I think. I actually watched a famous scene on YouTube, actually, while I was preparing for this
How do you view it
episode.
can you view it on 3D still?
No.
Oh, okay. I was like, but that would be the fun part.
If you had the glasses. I don't know. I don't know how all that works. That's like technical stuff. I don't know how all that works. And I will tell you, in the movie, like the tunnel system for the sharks is, underground, like in the ocean. Like it's very, scientific. But there's a scene where the shark rams the glass tunnel and, of course, floods everything and eats everybody.
So as we slept under the shark tunnel, there could have been some man-eating potential.
Exactly. So that's what made the sleepover so cool.
Honestly, I'm shocked you did it at all, Cynthia.
Well, in full honesty, as I'm laying under this shark tunnel trying to get a little bit of sleep, I would be lying if I told you there were not a couple intrusive thoughts about what am I going to do.
Well, the only ones you expressed to me were having to like change and brush your teeth in like public restrooms. I know that was a fear as well.
Yeah.
So the shark also breaking through the glass of the tunnel and ravaging 24 parents and their children. I mean, I can see how that would rank pretty high up there too.
I'm not sure if it was worse than the public restroom, but it was up there. And if you guys only knew how serious we are actually being right now.
We are dead serious.
Yeah. No, this was real for me. It was a lot of anxiety. But it was worth it. It was so awesome. And again, this shark tunnel, we were literally in this tube surrounded by sharks and other marine animals. And that's where we slept for the night. And I say slept, that's kind of generous because between the kids giggling and the worn out yoga mats we were laying on, we really just were laying down. But it was awesome. My little guy loved it. We made these amazing memories and we learned all about different types of marine animals. However, this field trip got me thinking because in the past, I've actually been torn about going to places like zoos and aquariums, aquariums like SeaWorld, because I'm an animal lover, as is Stephanie, and I've never really felt completely comfortable with these animals being held in captivity. So, for example, as much as I would love to swim with a dolphin, I personally never have. It's just not something I personally would feel comfortable with doing. I think dolphins belong in the ocean. And unless you've been living under a rock for the last decade, you know I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way. Specifically with SeaWorld, these questions of morality became more prominent with the general public after one of SeaWorld's head orca trainers was famously killed in 2010. And when the movie Blackfish came out 3 years later, the public as a whole really started asking the question, are we doing the right thing here?
Oh, and obviously we had our sleepover at SeaWorld Orlando. And again, anybody who's joining us for the first time, we live here. We live kind of in a suburb of Orlando, but we're close here. And I will tell you, there are still weekend pickets of SeaWorld, even now, with showing images of Blackfin, saying free the whales and those kinds of things. And even though I was the orchestrator of this sleepover, I still do have questions about a lot of what SeaWorld is doing. And even when Cynthia had the idea for this episode, she asked me if I would be offended if it turned out that maybe we weren't in the right to attend. Maybe there's a different way we should go about doing this. And of course, my answer is no. Information is power. I would love to know what we can do differently, how we can still give our kids these magical moments and still educate them about marine animals and how we can help them, but do it in a way that's humane and safe for human and animals. And clearly, when we're talking about the loss of human life, that really escalates things too.
You are absolutely right. We wanted to go into this with an open mind, and I did too. Because again, I watched Blackfish, and for a couple years after watching that movie, I was like, don't go to SeaWorld. And then there was information that came out about Blackfish, and I realized, you know what? That wasn't necessarily an accurate portrayal either of what happened. So let me do my own research. Let me go in with an open mind and then see where I land. The mystery I'm bringing to you today is, are places like SeaWorld doing the right thing? Should we be supporting them, or do more changes need to be made? Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, here's a little fun fact about that shark tunnel we slept in. I wish I'd known this going into the sleepover. In the SeaWorld Shark Encounter exhibit, you are able to experience the excitement of being surrounded by sharks without the fear of the glass breaking, since the glass can hold 372 elephants, or 2,232 tons without one single crack. The Shark Encounter tubing itself can hold back more than 450 tons of water, so we were safe.
I mean, from regular sharks, but I don't know about Shark 3D. That could have been a whole nother level, but luckily I don't think they have any of those at SeaWorld.
Thank goodness is all I have to say.
And of course, the part we slept in, all we saw most of was sweet little lobsters and a little sweet puffer fish that kept going above our heads. So guys, please don't be terrified.
If you have the chance, yeah, it was super cool. And actually, right where my son and I were stationed, we had a little family of lionfish, which are those beautiful, like spiky, stripy looking.
Yeah.
Oh, they were really cool. Very cool. Well, let me start off with a little SeaWorld history. The first SeaWorld park opened in San Diego on March 21st, 1964. And adult admission at the time was $2.25.
Get out.
Crazy, right? Get this, the annual pass, $4.25.
Get out.
In its first year, SeaWorld saw 200,000 guests in attendance. In 1965, a killer whale, which would become the first Shamu, was captured in Puget Sound, and that same year was acquired by the San Diego SeaWorld location. This whale died 6 years later from uterine infection and blood poisoning. However, the name Shamu became the stage name for all the killer whales at SeaWorld. SeaWorld Orlando, where Stephanie and I grew up going to and just recently had our sleepover, opened in 1973. In 1988, SeaWorld had its first successful killer whale birth when Orchid was born on September 23rd. And that same year, SeaWorld Antonio opened. Today, SeaWorld Orlando says it's their company's commitment to rescuing and caring for marine animals, which they have been doing for more than 50 years. In that time, SeaWorld's rescue teams have come to the aid of more than 41,000 sick, injured, or orphaned animals in need, giving them a second chance at life. And SeaWorld says none of this would be possible without the continued support of their partner agencies, park guests, past members, and dedicated team members, as well as the people across the globe taking action to protect these amazing animals and their habitats.
I really hope this proves to be true because I want to continue to be part of one of those members that's helping these endangered creatures.
I will tell you, no matter what else we learn today, it is true. SeaWorld does a lot of good. You can feel good about that. SeaWorld does a lot of good. In fact, SeaWorld's rescue teams are on call 24/7, 365 days a year, and they partner with multiple government agencies to rescue and help animals in need of their care.
Well, it's one of the first times I ever did a behind the scenes look when I was a teenager. I remember going back to their rescue area and they were literally feeding orphan manatees little bottles. They like roll them on their backs and like stick the little bottles in and they put their little flappers, like their little flapper fins up to like hold the bottle. I was totally hooked.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, what could be better than this?
What could be nothing?
And so even when Blackfish came out, I really had that in the back of my mind. I'm like, how could that person that was sitting there helping that orphan manatee, how could they be so evil at the same time? And not to say that there can't be overlap. There's always a yin and a yang to everything. But I'm glad to know that really is what they're doing. That really is part of their mission. Regardless of what they're doing in other areas, that is a core part of who SeaWorld is.
It absolutely is. Absolutely. But like you said, I do think two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
So
I know you're making me really nervous.
Honestly, I don't think I'm going to tell you anything you don't already maybe know somewhere deep inside. But we need to focus. We need to give an accurate portrayal. And they do so much good for so many animals in need.
All right. Gotcha.
Now, I grew up in Orlando in the 80s, so I was very fortunate that SeaWorld was a part of my childhood. And especially in the 1980s, I don't know if you remember this, Stephanie, but SeaWorld's pride and joy was definitely Shamu.
Shamu or bust.
Shamu, the killer whale, the orca.
Yeah.
Now, orcas are actually the largest members of the dolphin family. Did you know that?
I didn't.
I didn't either. Now, not only are these marine mammals highly intelligent, but they are also known for their complex communication patterns and their cooperative hunting techniques. Killer whales are highly social. Most live in social groups called pods, which are groups of maternally related individuals. These pods, these families, typically consist of anywhere from just a few to 20 or more animals, and even larger groups can sometimes form for temporary social interactions, for mating, and they sometimes come together to hunt when there are seasonal concentrations of prey. So that's really interesting. They develop these relationships not only with their own family members, their own pod members, but also with other communities when it's in their best interest.
Really cool.
Each pod of orcas has a unique set of noises, including clicks, whistles, and pulsed calls, and they use these to communicate, allowing them to recognize each other from great distances. And each pod possesses a unique set of calls that are learned and culturally transmitted among the individual whales.
That's amazing. It's like their own dialect.
It's so cool. So cool. And these calls maintain group cohesion and serve as family badges, if you will. They also use echolocation to communicate with each other as they're hunting, making them formidable predators in the underwater domain. In fact, the killer whale, or orca, is the apex predator of the marine realm. They feed on fish, seals, sharks, even other whales. Killer whales use advanced hunting techniques, including cooperating strategies with each other to secure their prey. In a battle between a great white shark and an orca, the great white is lunch.
There's a video that just came out like a month ago of an orca streaking across the ocean and just taking out a great white shark. Do you see it?
I did.
It is wild.
It's wild.
It like broadsides this great white shark and it's just gone.
There's no fight. And it's so crazy because growing up, I remember, the orcas, they're so cute. The SeaWorld trainers are in the water with them. You would never do that with a great white shark. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Killer whales, they are serious. Now, killer whales are found in all oceans. And while they are most abundant in colder waters like Antarctica or Norway, Alaska, they are also found in tropical and subtropical waters. And this is something I somehow only recently thought about, because when I think of killer whales in the wild, I don't think of seeing them here off the coast of Florida. Do you?
No, I definitely think of them in like Alaska.
Me too.
I know they live in other places, but if you were to said picture an orca, I'm going to picture them swimming by an iceberg.
Exactly. I would never picture one here swimming by a palm tree.
Right.
So I was wondering, how does SeaWorld keep them in such tropical climates? But again, they can be found in tropical waters. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
The most well-studied killer whale populations occur in the eastern North Pacific Ocean. The average lifespan for male killer whales in the wild is about 30 years, but they can live up to 60 years. And females typically live about 50 years, but can live up to 90 years in the wild.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that long.
Right. It's long.
Wow.
And SeaWorld will tell you the average lifespan is in the mid-30s.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Mm-hmm. Females reach sexual maturity when they are between 10 and 13 years old. They are typically pregnant for 15 to 18 months.
Yikes.
Ooh,
Yikes.
with a whale.
With a whale.
And they give birth to a single calf. Calves nurse exclusively for at least a year, but remain in close association with their mother for the first 2 years. And in the wild, killer whales can travel up to 100 miles a day.
Incredible.
There have been very few cases of orcas attacking humans in the wild, and most marine biologists believe that in the majority of these cases, these attacks are a case of mistaken identity, where the orca initially identifies the human as a prey animal. Much like sharks. They tell you sharks don't like humans. They think you're a seal, so they bite you.
Right. I thought that was really interesting, actually, what they were talking about at the sleepover, that sharks really don't like the taste of humans. They don't like the iron in our blood. And so what happens is they come up, they see us, they think we're a turtle or a seal. They take a bite, realize we're not a turtle or a seal, and then they let go.
Mhm.
It's not like they really want us as prey.
Exactly. Same exact thing with orcas.
As a Floridian, honestly, I'm much more terrified of alligators.
Absolutely. I am with you.
I'm way more terrified of alligators.
100%. You will not find me in certain bodies of water here in Florida, and I'm not talking about the beach.
No, correct.
Now, in these recorded incidents where orcas have attacked humans, the orca generally does cease to attack quickly after presumably realizing the human is not their typical
So a similar situation.
prey animal.
Sure.
Absolutely. In the early 1910s, a pod of Antarctic-type B killer whales, otherwise known as pack ice orcas, attempted to tip an ice floe on which a Terra Nova expedition photographer and a sledge dog team were standing. Now, pack ice orcas specialize in hunting seals by wave washing them off the ice floes. So they literally just try to get them off the ice.
Yeah, it is wild. I saw a documentary about it. It is wild and awful, and I can't say I would recommend anyone to watch it, but it was fascinating and terrifying all at the same time.
It is. It's really, again, if you love animals, we want the killer whales to eat, but we don't want them to eat the little seals.
Yeah. Yes, it was all those things. It's all the feels.
Rough. It's rough. Well, witnesses theorized the orcas must have mistakenly identified the barking sled dogs as a family of seals, and they initiated the same hunting technique with this expedition. Fortunately, nobody was injured. In September of 1972, 18-year-old Hans Kretschmer was bitten by an orca while he was surfing. Earlier in the day, he'd seen some sea lions playing in the waves. So when he felt a little nudge, he expected it to be an adorable and curious sea lion.
Whoopsie.
Boy, was he surprised when he turned around to see an almost 20-foot long killer whale had bitten down on his leg.
Ah!
So in an effort to escape the bite of this animal, Hans punched the whale repeatedly, causing it to suddenly let him go. The whale did not want to eat him, and Hans was released. He then had to swim more than 130 feet to shore, which he was miraculously able to do. Now, the injury he sustained was horrific. There were 3 teeth penetrating bone. The whale just narrowly missed a major artery. Hans' doctor said it looked like someone chopped his leg off with a sharp axe.
Wow.
Hans required 100 stitches, and to this day, Hans holds the title as the only human being to be seriously injured by a wild orca.
Wow. I mean, I don't know if I'd want that title, but wow. That's
Right?
incredible.
It's incredible. Now, just a few months before the attack on Hans, Dougal Robertson's 43-foot wooden schooner named Lucy was damaged by a pod of killer whales and sunk 200 miles west of the Galapagos Islands. Everyone on board managed to escape on an inflatable life raft, and after 38 days as castaways, the group was rescued by a Japanese fishing trawler. Again, no one was injured.
Oh my gosh. And what was the idea that the orcas thought it was somehow food?
I didn't read what the motive was.
Yeah, what they thought. Okay, crazy.
In August 2005, 12-year-old Ellis Miller was swimming in 4-foot deep water. 4-foot deep water in Helm Bay in Alaska when he was nudged by a 25-foot transient killer whale. The whale bumped 12-year-old Ellis on the left side of his chest and shoulder, then arched around him before returning to deeper waters. It's believed that the orca mistakenly identified Ellis as a splashing harbor seal, which were known to frequent that particular bay's water. And when the whale realized its mistake, it aborted the attack, and Ellis did not sustain any injuries.
Thank goodness that was a cognizant, very self-aware killer whale.
Really,
Right?
because that was just a 12-year-old little boy.
Yeah.
So, that's
Yeah.
scary. So I listed these attacks dating back to the early 1910s.
But honestly, it's not very many of them.
Exactly. Overall, the number of reported attacks on humans by orcas in the wild is very minimal,
Wow.
often with no attacks occurring in an entire year.
Right. So it does make attacks at SeaWorld stand out a little bit more, right?
It
Is that where you're going
absolutely
with this? I'm
does.
kind of, all of a sudden it clicked in my mind, like, but wait a minute. Then why are they happening elsewhere? Okay. All right.
I didn't mention all of the wild orca
No, but
attacks, but
still.
I went over the big ones.
Yeah.
SeaWorld has more than that. Now, they don't all end in death. There have been numerous reports of close calls with whales at SeaWorld, and I'm going to share some of them with you in a bit. But first, let me tell you that there are more than 3,600 whales and dolphins in captivity in aquariums, zoos, and marine parks. As of March 2024, there were at least 55 orcas in captivity, with 33 of them being born in captivity. 22 of them were captured from the wild. In 1970, in Penn Cove, more than 80 orcas were captured. And if you've seen the movie Blackfish,
Yes.
this
These are the
footage,
these are the ones that make me cry.
yes, it's literally the hard part for me to watch. It's really hard for me to watch because this footage is used in the film. 7 of these orcas were sold to marine parks. At least 5 of them died. The others were either released or escaped. The last remaining orca from these captures died in August of 2023, only last year. Her name was Lolita, and she'd been held at Miami Seaquarium in Florida since 1970 in the world's smallest orca tank.
Yeah.
It literally is the size of what we would consider a large pool.
Wow.
Lolita's family is part of the Southern resident orca community. Her mother, who is believed to have been born in 1930, still resides with the rest of Lolita's family, swimming freely in the open waters where Lolita was captured.
Wow.
Now, the footage of this capture, no matter where you stand on the subject of captive whales, is disturbing. And adding to that, it features an interview with diver John Crow, who worked on this capture and was in charge of secretly disposing of the carcasses of the dead orcas who were killed, trying to protect their families. And these deaths were hidden to avoid them being counted in the total numbers taken during the capture.
Yeah, not cool.
Not cool at all. Thankfully, the last wild orca collection by SeaWorld took place in 1979. So since they're no longer capturing wild orcas, SeaWorld utilized an orca breeding program in the decades since. So let me introduce you to Baby Shamu.
Baby Shamu.
Baby Shamu. She was the first surviving orca born in captivity on September 26, 1985. 10 orca calves had been born in captivity before 1985, but 5 were stillborn, and the others all died within 2 months of their birth. So that
Oh,
right there tells you
that's disturbing.
something's not right.
Okay, that's fair.
Baby Shamu died on October 4th, 2010 at 25 years old. So a premature death.
Okay.
Stephanie, do you remember celebrating the birth of the killer whales when you were growing up?
A little bit. I definitely remember them being televised. I remember it being a big deal. I don't know that I ever went to the park for them or anything, but I definitely remember them being a big deal.
Yeah, they were. Here in Orlando, especially, like
I remember seeing the video on like the news of like the little baby slipping out.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I absolutely remember that video. It was a big deal. And you know how theme parks will have like a theme for the year.
Sure.
I remember
Oh,
like
do you?
the birth of Baby Shamu
Yeah.
being like, you know, a season-long theme. It was a big celebration here. As I mentioned before, Shamu really was the face of SeaWorld. What Mickey Mouse is to Disney, Shamu was to SeaWorld.
Absolutely.
Now, do you remember going to the park as a child and watching the Shamu Show where the trainers would swim with the killer whales?
Oh, of course. I wanted to be the person swimming with the killer whales, standing on their noses, flapping their fins, giving them hugs. I remember all of it.
You and me both, girl.
Yes.
You and me both. And in case you haven't seen these shows, I mean, they were magnificent to watch. The trainers would literally ride on the back of the whales. They'd put their feet on the tip of the orca's nose, and the orca would jump out with the trainer standing on top
Literally,
of their nose.
yeah, standing on top of their nose, and then the trainer would like dive off in like dramatic form. And they had the most amazing soundtrack.
Oh, yes.
Just inspirational music, like it was like the uniting of like human and beast, and we're all living in harmony. I mean, it really felt like that, right?
It was really moving,
Yeah.
really beautiful. And as kids, we weren't thinking about anything other than how this felt. And just like Stephanie, I absolutely remember being a little kid and saying to myself, when I grow up, I'm doing that. That's going
Yeah.
to be my job. But again, as a little kid, I had no idea how dangerous that job is. I mean, despite the word killer, as in killer whale, these animals really appeared to be these gentle, lovable creatures. But anytime you're working with wild animals, it's not without risks, right?
Sure.
So SeaWorld had safety protocols, of course. And part of those standards was that all new orca trainers must complete the Shamu Stadium orientation checklist that tested their mastery of necessary skills. They had to demonstrate an understanding of SeaWorld's animal training standard operating procedures. New trainers had to sign a form stating they understood these procedures. And each year they were required to review and re-sign this form. In no case was a trainer with fewer than 18 months experience allowed to have close contact with a whale, and any trainer with less than 3 years experience was not allowed to work without the supervision of a senior trainer. Now, once a trainer was assigned to a whale's team, he or she was required to familiarize themselves with that whale's profile and any incident reports that went along with that particular whale. And they were only able to progress from non-tactile to tactile work depending on the senior trainer's approval.
Okay. That all sounds very reasonable.
It does. But unfortunately, despite these safety protocols, tragedy occurred.
Well, we do know that happened. Yes.
So let me talk to you for a few minutes about one infamous killer whale, Tilikum.
Yeah.
Tilikum was captured in 1983 when he was only 2 years old.
Yeah.
And on February 24th, 2010, tourists enjoying a Dine with Shamu show were unwilling witnesses to a horrific scene. Now, this Dine with Shamu show, I've personally never seen it, but it's not the main killer whale show. So there is this huge stadium where the shows and the tricks that we were talking about earlier occur. This is a much smaller show where guests are able to observe trainers working with the whales in a more intimate setting. During this show, 40-year-old trainer Dawn Brancheau, who was very experienced and had a reputation for being very good at her job and always following protocol, was pulled into the tank by her hair. Now, at this time, trainers were still getting into the pools with these animals. But remember, I told you all the trainers were assigned to a specific whale and they had to be familiar with that particular whale's profile?
Sure.
Tilikum had quite the profile. There was literally a segment of training called the Tilly Talk, which included a dedicated chapter on Tilikum's specific protocols. So Tilikum was absolutely not one of the whales that trainers were allowed to get in the water with.
Oh, okay.
Now, I've read witness statements, I've read interviews, sheriff's report, autopsy report, and if you look this incident, you will hear it reported a few different ways because we're going off of eyewitness accounts and everybody has their different interpretations. But what is most widely reported and what I believe to be accurate is Dawn was laying on her belly on the deck of the tank doing what's called a relationship session.
Okay.
She had long hair and it was in a ponytail, and her hair floated into Tilikum's mouth. And within seconds, she was in the pool. Now, there were eyewitnesses, both park employees and park guests, who saw parts of this incident, and it became very apparent very quickly this was a bad situation. So alarms were sounded, and the park guests were ushered out of the area. At the same time, employees from all over the park responded to the alarms by rushing to the scene. There's cameras located in different places around this particular tank, so some of what happened next was captured in this footage, but because of the size of Tilikum and the angles of the pool and then the fact that Tilikum was swimming around, there are moments where his body blocked the view of Dawn.
Right. She was so tiny compared to him, right?
She was, absolutely. First of all, he was the largest killer whale in the park.
He was huge.
Huge. And she was, a tiny petite
Right.
woman. For the next several minutes, Tilikum would swim with Dawn, dragging her all around the pool, while SeaWorld workers tried desperately to save her. Nets were unfurled in an attempt to isolate Tilikum. At one point, Tilikum appeared to let go of Dawn, but then he grabbed her by the foot before anyone could pull her out of the water. He continued to pull her under and drag her all around the pool. There was a period of time where Dawn's body was obscured by Tilikum while they were underwater. And when Dawn was able to be seen again, she appeared lifeless. Tilikum was finally corralled into a pool with a hydraulic lift, which was used to remove him out of the water. But reports on how long that took range from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. And even after Tilikum was lifted out of the water, he would not let go of Dawn.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It took quite a long time for them to be able to get her out.
The hair may have accidentally floated into his mouth, but there's no doubt that he was an active participant in what was happening to Dawn. Whether he intended to kill her or whether this was just some form of play, I don't know if you go into that, but whatever it was, this was definitely something he was doing.
He was 100% responsible.
Okay.
He was 100% responsible. He had her in his mouth. Eyewitness accounts vary between did he have her by the arm? Did he have her by the foot? Again, different angles, but he had her in his mouth. She was trying to get away. People were trying to get her away. He did not let her go.
Okay.
And even after he drowned her, even after he was lifted out of the water, he still would not let her go.
Wow.
Investigators said that Dawn died from multiple traumatic injuries and drowning.
Oh.
Because if you think about it, she's being dragged around by this huge whale in his mouth.
I just always kind of assumed it was drowning. I didn't think about the other things too.
I think drowning was like the ultimate, she drowned. He held her underwater for minutes, but she also had, wounds. There were some other stuff I don't really want to get into because some of it's just kind of not really necessary. But by the time they pulled her out, she was in bad shape.
Okay. Well, I guess that's true. I mean, he's holding her in his mouth. I mean, that's not a gentle place. It's a killer whale.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, I distinctly remember when this happened. It was horrific. And in the days, weeks, and months after, all kinds of information came out. We heard it was trainer error and that Dawn knew better than to have her hair in a ponytail, which...
That's true. There was a lot of victim blaming in this one. I remember it.
A lot of victim blaming. And it has come out since that having your hair in ponytail. Everybody had their hair in ponytail. That was
I
the
remember them
protocol.
having that.
Yes.
Absolutely. These long ponytails.
Right. But, to try to spin the narrative a little bit, that was one of the things that came out. Then we were told it was just a tragic accident. Some experts told the public it was a vicious attack, but it wasn't until after Dawn's death that we were told about the 2 other human deaths that Tilikum was linked to.
Mm-hmm.
In February 1991, 8 years after Tilikum's capture, Tilikum was at Sealand of the Pacific in Victoria, British Columbia, when a young part-time trainer, Kelty Byrne, slipped and fell into his pool. Tilikum and his 2 female tank mates, so there were 2 other whales with him, 2 female whales,
Okay.
pulled Kelty under and dragged her all around the pool. Witnesses say Kelty could be seen fighting and screaming. At one point, she managed to reach the side of the pool and tried to climb out, but the whales pulled her back down.
Wow.
Staff members threw Kelty a life ring, but the whales kept her away from it.
Oh, man.
That sent chills down my spine because that's like,
Yeah.
ooh,
It's very-
did they mean to?
It feels calculated.
It feels
And it's
calculated.
like, are you putting too many human characteristics? Like, even when you were like, Tilikum was 100% responsible. I'm like, he's also an animal.
He's an animal.
You know what I mean?
He's
like,
he's the apex predator.
exactly. But that's what he's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, when I say he's responsible, I mean, he was responsible for her death. Was he acting out of character for a killer whale? I can't say that.
Well, and I think that's worth clarifying. 'Cause I know what you're saying, but we're not saying, well, clearly he was this calculated killer. No, but he's a killer whale.
Right.
This is his natural instinct, if you will.
Right. And I will tell you, that has been a big question. That's a big question. Was it a calculated attack?
Yeah.
Were any of these calculated attacks? Were they just playing?
Or are they just playing? And this is kind of what the question was. Did he think he was just playing with her?
Right. I will tell you now, spoiler alert, nobody really has the answer. Some people believe it's an attack, and there are behaviors that they've seen that lead them to believe that. Others say, no, he was just playing. And there are behaviors that are used to explain that away. So nobody can really say for sure.
But regardless of intent, it resulted in the death of a trainer.
Regardless
the death
of intent.
Dawn and the death of
Right.
Kelty.
If Tilikum had not held her under the water, I mean, she tried to get out and people were trying to get her out. If he had not held her under the water, she wouldn't have drowned.
Right.
With Kelty, she was actively trying to get out. The whales would not let her out. At one point, she was able to, break the surface, and witnesses heard her scream, "I don't want to die." But just like in Dawn's case, she was pulled back under. She was drowned, and it was several hours before Kelty's body could be recovered from the pool. So once
This
again,
is haunting.
it's awful. And once again, even after she had passed, the whales would not let her go. Now, I do want to mention, because some of this is up for debate, Tilikum was not alone in that attack. There were 2 other whales.
But you wonder, was he learning from them? There are all these questions.
There was. And if you watch Blackfish, 2 women who were at the park the day this happened, they say, no, it was Tilikum. It was Tilikum doing it. It was the big male whale with the bent over dorsal fin. That's their opinion.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. I can't say for sure, but I can tell you there were 3 whales, and all the reports I read said whales.
Yeah.
Participated in holding her under. Again, the motive, I don't know. Were they playing?
Right.
They can hold their breath for long periods of time. Do they think we all can? I mean, I don't know that.
Yeah.
Sealand never recovered from this incident, and it closed a year later. And that's when Tilikum was sent to SeaWorld Orlando. One morning, 7 years later, a 27-year-old man named Daniel Dukes was found dead, nude, and draped over Tilikum's back in his nighttime pool at SeaWorld. Do you remember that?
I had forgotten until you just told me about that. But yes, I don't remember it when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I remember hearing about it after Dawn's death.
Okay. I definitely remember hearing about this when it happened because honestly, it was made out to be a bit of a joke because this naked man was found in a pool with a killer whale.
I think the idea was it was a bit of victim blaming. It was this guy, maybe he got drunk, maybe he wasn't following procedure and he just fell into the tank.
Right. Or he wanted to go swimming with a killer whale. What did he think was going to happen?
Yeah.
Not that we're saying any of this, but that was kind of the attitude surrounding it. Again, this was before Dawn's death.
Yes.
So it was just some random person.
He was not a trainer, correct?
He was not. He was a transient. who
Right.
suffered from mental illness.
Right.
They believe he'd hid in the park in an attempt to stay after closing, stay overnight, and for reasons unknown, it's believed he decided to go for a swim with a killer whale. So bad choices were made.
But again, it's like somebody like, okay, I'm gonna put myself into this lion's cage. Like, what are you expecting is gonna happen? So that one, it was almost easier to explain away.
Right. Like, what do you think's going to happen? You're not trained. You're just a random civilian getting it in a pool with a killer whale.
Right.
Sure. And it was. There was not really a lot of controversy surrounding that death. Like I
Yeah.
said, it was more just kind of, what did he think was going to happen?
But
Kind
again,
of attitude.
knowing what we know now, there probably should have been more examination as to what happened. Possibly.
Well, knowing what we know now, he's one of 3 people that's died in a pool with Tilikum.
Right. Right.
Now, with Daniel, an autopsy found numerous wounds, contusions, and abrasions covering his body, and his genitals had been bitten off.
Oh, I do remember that detail.
Now, again, it's unknown if this happened as part of an attack or if after Daniel died, he was just used as a toy.
Right.
Dawn's death really brought to light that SeaWorld and parks like it had some problems. There are numerous other instances, too many for me to share, where trainers were seriously injured. There were some very close calls of trainers working with these animals where a trainer would get pulled into the water and minutes would go by. I mean, 30 minutes, longer sometimes, of a whale pulling a trainer around, not letting them out. And somehow, fortunately, the trainers were able to escape.
And these were before Dawn's death.
Before Dawn's death.
Wow.
Yes. There are numerous incidents of this type of thing happening. And all you have to do is Google it and a whole bunch of them will pop up.
Well, you've already done that for me.
I have. One trainer was riding on the back of an orca during a show when another full-grown whale jumped into the air and landed on him. To watch that one is rough. I mean, you don't see anything, but just knowing what happens. Now, miraculously, this trainer survived, but has obviously had numerous surgeries. I mean, they say he broke almost every bone in his body.
I mean, not to be flippant, but like a pancake. Right. I mean,
a whale landed on him. He was on a whale and a whale landed on him. You know, he was already on a solid surface.
Exactly.
And a whale landed on top of him. Oh, no. Yeah. I'm amazed he lived. I really, truly am.
Seriously.
As I mentioned, there are several other instances of orcas dragging their trainers around for long periods of time. Dawn's death ultimately became the subject of a book called Death at SeaWorld, and then it was the subject of the documentary film that we keep referring to called Blackfish, which has led more and more people to question the ethics of keeping these apex predators in concrete tanks. After allegations that the marine park had failed to train workers to safely interact with these killer whales, SeaWorld and state regulators agreed on a settlement that included SeaWorld discontinuing in-water interaction between trainers and whales.
Yeah, because I guess the question is there any safe way to interact with the whales? Because even these procedures they had, what could have prevented that? I mean, they're saying this ponytail, but you know what I'm saying? But could have been anything. If any kind of bonding thing, he could have grabbed her arm, her leg. There's no safe way to do it.
There's no safe way, right? There's no safe way for a human to be in a pool with a killer whale.
With a killer whale.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. SeaWorld implemented some other safety measures because even though they were not going to willingly be getting in the water with the whales again, Dawn wasn't supposed to be in the water. That was an accident. So they did prepare for the unplanned. In 2014, SeaWorld trainers began wearing custom-designed emergency vests during the whale shows. And when we were just there at the park, I noticed they were wearing kind of like these clunky belts. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. And now I'm like, oh, I bet that was their little flotation device. Because with the simple pull of a cord, this vest, they call it a vest, but what I saw was a belt, becomes a flotation device. And it also contains a mini scuba pack and a regulator that could provide a trainer with at least a few minutes of air if they're pulled underwater, which I think that alone is amazing.
Oh, incredible. So the flotation device would essentially keep them more buoyant, is the idea?
I read one thing that said it's like a high impact. That's not the right word, but like it kind of shoots them up.
Oh, I
So it's
see.
a very
Okay, yeah.
powerful, like,
Yeah.
flotation device that should.
Okay.
Now, if you're in a whale's mouth, I don't know that that's gonna do anything, but I guess
Or it could maybe distract the
that's
whale,
true.
shock the whale. You know what I'm saying? If all of a sudden this, essentially like airbag is
That's
like
true.
inflating in front of you, maybe it would give them a little bit of time to escape. But again, it's like, are you playing with fire?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's like, okay, you have this belt, you have this regulator, but the bottom line is, should we be doing this?
Good question. I'm gonna keep giving you information. We'll see if we have it answered at the end. The park also introduced a quick rise floor in the Dine with Shamu pool that could lift the whales out of the water in just a matter of moments. Because remember, they already had that floor that would
Oh,
come up,
right.
but it took up to 30 minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's too late.
Yeah.
So for it to be able to kind of pop up and get the whales out of the water in a few minutes, I can see that being very helpful in the event of an emergency.
Yeah, but honestly, with the Tilikum situation, he was out of the water. He still wasn't letting her go.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, he didn't let her go.
So, again, okay, that's nice, but
I do believe that despite all of these safety measures and protocols, it's still an inherently dangerous job.
right.
Even after the new safety standards, SeaWorld's audience numbers never fully recovered. Tilikum had been a star attraction at SeaWorld. He was the largest orca ever
I remember
on
seeing
record.
him. He was enormous. Now, he was also the whale featured in Free Willy, wasn't he?
No,
No.
he was
Okay.
not.
A different whale.
I'm going to tell you about him.
Okay, I want to hear about the Free Willy whale
Uh-huh.
because I will tell you, Shamu
Uh-huh.
and Willy, I mean,
Uh-huh.
together, like, it was like childhood magic
Oh, yes.
all over the place. So I can't wait to hear about that whale.
Yes.
But yeah, I do remember Tilikum was just absolutely enormous.
He was the largest orca on record in captivity ever of all time.
Incredible.
The largest whale.
Incredible.
He was also the company's star breeder. He's fathered 18 calves with 8 of the company's female orcas.
Which I have to say, if you're in a business and that production is pretty important and possibly important enough to keep a dangerous animal around.
Absolutely. So especially after Don passed, Tilikum was pretty much used for breeding purposes. And unfortunately, and this is terrible, Tilikum spent a lot of time in isolation, which, remember, these are social animals.
Yeah,
So it's very similar to keeping a human in solitary confinement.
sure.
Most of his time was spent floating in a small enclosure, and he suffered from repeated infections. In comparison to the ocean, we have to take into consideration that these tanks are minuscule. They are too shallow to be able to deep dive to escape the tropical heat. You know, he's in the water, but these are not super deep
And the
tanks.
sun is beating down.
Beating
Yeah.
down, there's nowhere to escape. There's no coral. There's no nothing to look at. It's just a concrete pool, literally.
For what we've already established, are incredibly intelligent animals.
It's really devastating to me. It's devastating to me that anybody ever thought this was okay. It's just awful. On top of all that, he was surrounded by souvenir shops, popcorn stands, blaring music, applauding audiences, none of which is part of his natural habitat. Tilikum died in 2017 from what SeaWorld described as a persistent and complicated bacterial lung infection. And they added that he had been treated with combinations of anti-inflammatories, antibacterials, anti-nausea medications, hydration therapy, and aerosolized antimicrobial therapy. So they really wanted us to know that they were caring for him, giving him treatment.
How old was he?
If my calculations are correct, he was about 33 years old when he died.
Okay. So not super young, but it definitely, whatever few years he had, they definitely wouldn't be considered fulfilling years, I wouldn't think.
Oh, no. And now, Stephanie, I have to tell you something that is probably the saddest thing I'm going to say during this whole podcast.
All right. Just go ahead and get to it.
If it helps you at all, I have no way of proving that this is true. Okay? But I believe it to be true.
Okay.
So one of my friends, who shall remain nameless, dated a SeaWorld night guard. And this night guard was in charge of patrolling the Orca Stadium and the surrounding pools. And this guard confirmed that Tilikum was pretty much kept in isolation, and this man, who dated my friend, would hear Tilikum crying alone for hours at night.
Okay, well, I'm done.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that sucks.
It's awful.
That sucks.
It's awful. And again, I have no way of proving that to be true. But I also, when I know it's not firsthand for me, but it's close.
Yeah.
And I have no reason not to believe it to be true.
Well, and really, that's kind of the reason you wanted to cover this. We don't have an agenda outside of just seeking the truth.
Right.
That's ultimately because we want to be supporters of animals. We want to be supporters of these amazing parks. Like, we're in the middle. We're unbiased. And see, it's not like we're trying to fit some agenda.
No, not at all. In fact, I
By
would
saying
really
that.
be happy to feel good to go back to SeaWorld.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Now, Tilikum is not the only captive orca to have caused injury or death to a trainer. Only a few months before Tilikum killed Dawn, Keto, an orca who'd been transferred from SeaWorld Orlando to Loro Park Zoo in the Canary Islands, killed his trainer, Alexis Martinez. And at the time of Alexis's death, Keto was owned by SeaWorld. The training and safety practices that were used were SeaWorld's practices. Alexis had trained at SeaWorld in preparation for his job as Keto's trainer at Loro Park.
Wow. Okay, so this is essentially an extension of SeaWorld.
Right. It's a SeaWorld whale, SeaWorld training. SeaWorld's got some problems.
Right.
Jason Ribble concludes in his book, Fear of the Animal Planet, The History of Animal Resistance, quote, "Resistance is not a psychological disorder. Indeed, it's often a moment of distinct clarity. This is not to say that Tilikum and others are not suffering from clinical depression or stress-related ailments. Rather, the point is that captive animals have used their intelligence, ingenuity, and tenacity to overcome the situations and obstacles put before them. Their actions have had intent and purpose. If anything, these animals are psychologically strong, not weak, and they are choosing to fight back. The industry encourages you to think that these animals are intelligent, but not intelligent enough to have the ability to resist. The industry wants you to care about them so that you and your children will return for a visit. But it does not want you to care so much that you might develop empathy and begin to question whether these animals actually want to be there." End quote.
Correct. Correct. I mean, I think that's true.
Yeah. He says we can recognize the struggle, learn from it, and choose a side. Where did Tilikum want to be? Certainly not confined in the lonely and sterile tanks of SeaWorld.
Sure.
So what can we do? We've established that SeaWorld and many places like SeaWorld do a lot of good in the way of conservation and education. For as many whales or dolphins held in captivity, there are hundreds of injured, orphaned, and trapped animals that otherwise would not have survived if SeaWorld had not stepped in to save them.
Like that tiny little manatee.
Exactly. SeaWorld and places like it help to spark a curiosity in us that make us want to do good for these animals. My son was so excited to learn about the different types of marine life and then to see them up close and personal. Who knows what may come out of that curiosity in the future? So we want to make sure we don't literally throw the baby Shamu out with the bathwater. In 2016, in response to major backlash, SeaWorld announced that they were ending their killer whale breeding program and that the orcas and their care are the last generation at the park.
This is when I started going back to SeaWorld again because I did the same thing. I said, well, I'm done. I am not supporting that anymore. But then when they said they're changing their philosophy on the breeding program and they're having a lot of experiments where they've tried to return some of these orcas to the wild and they don't fare well because they're not wild animals. They're wild animals, but they don't have a lot of those wild instincts.
You are correct. Absolutely.
And they don't have these native dialects that you were speaking about that these pods have.
Right.
And so it makes it very hard to put them back out. That's where I reconciled it in my own mind. I don't know where you are with that, but that's when I started saying, okay, let's give SeaWorld another try.
Well, it is my humble opinion that ending the killer whale breeding program is no doubt the right thing to do. For me, I don't know that it's good enough.
Okay, tell me more.
SeaWorld currently holds 18 killer whales in its 3 parks in the United States. What about these whales? Do we really need to keep them in captivity for the rest of their lives? At the same time, as you mentioned, we can't just set them free. They won't survive. But there are some alternatives. Naomi Rose, a marine mammal scientist for the Animal Welfare Institute, says the goal is to improve the welfare of the animals, and being in a natural habitat is always going to be better for the animals than being in a concrete box. She points to years of research showing the consequences of captivity, including hyperaggression, dorsal fin collapse in male orcas, which is only seen in 1% of the orcas in the wild, repetitive patterns like swimming in circles and regurgitating food, severe tooth damage from chewing on concrete, tanks, and steel bars. Captive orcas show signs of chronic stress. But what do we do with them? Orcas raised in captivity are likely to struggle if released into the open ocean. They would have a hard time catching wild prey, as this is a behavior they would normally learn from their families in the wild. Many orcas raised in captivity have health problems that could require ongoing human care. And orcas born and raised in captivity are at risk of coming into contact with infectious diseases that their immune systems aren't prepared for. These are, very valid reasons why we can't just release them. Only one captive orca in the U.S. has ever been released back into the ocean. That whale's name is Kiko, and he is the orca who starred in the 1993 film Free Willy.
So it was Free Kiko after Free Willy.
Isn't that cool?
That is so cool.
Efforts to release Kiko began shortly after the film's huge success, when the movie studio itself called for his release.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, how can you be behind this whale not being in captivity while keeping a whale in captivity?
Exactly. So in 1996, he was transferred from a tank in Mexico City to a rehab facility in Oregon. He was placed in a pool filled with ocean water and introduced to live fish. And over a period of 18 months, he gained 1,900 pounds and his health improved.
1,900?
1,900 pounds.
Holy cow.
In 1998, he was transferred to a sea pen, and that is a large part of the ocean that's marked off for rehabilitated marine animals to live. And Kiko's sea pen was in Iceland, where he continued to receive the medical care he needed. And at first, Kiko stayed in a sea pen as he acclimated to life in the ocean. But eventually, he was able to swim in the open ocean with the help of human guide boats. And in the summer of 2002, he traveled 1,000 miles to the coast of Norway. During his travels, Kiko had many encounters with wild orcas, but he did struggle to fully integrate with them. And in 2003, only 5 years after his release, Kiko died of pneumonia at the age of 27. Because Kiko was not able to integrate with wild orcas, critics of the effort described his release as a failure. But animal rights activists say Kiko was able to regain his health after years in captivity. And while his death was premature, he had years of freedom in the ocean. And I think it's only fair to mention that during the time that Kiko was being rehabilitated and released, 17 orcas died in captivity.
Wow. Wow.
Now, similar plans were made to release Lolita. Remember, we talked about Lolita earlier?
I do.
In the smallest orca enclosure. Sadly, Lolita died from complications of a suspected renal condition in 2023 before she could be moved to a sea pen. So that was really sad.
I do remember that being really sad. I remember being really sad that day that she passed away.
Kiko's story is why orca experts and animal rights activists support the creation of whale sanctuaries and sea pens. And for me, this is the answer.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah. It's in this setting that orcas can swim free, but remain close to humans who can provide food and medical care if necessary. Sanctuaries exist for other animals that have been released, such as elephants, tigers, and bears, although, in full disclosure, it is harder to establish this kind of space for a large ocean creature, but it can be done. The sea pen in Iceland, where Kiko was released, now houses 2 beluga whales and could potentially hold other mammals, including potentially killer whales. And there are also several warm water marine mammal sanctuaries being built in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean. Lori Marino, a marine mammal neuroscientist and the founder and president of the Whale Sanctuary Project, is part of an effort to build the first of its kind killer whale sanctuary in Nova Scotia. And once completed, this sanctuary would occupy 100 acres of water space. And that's big enough to fit about 75 American football fields. Depths in this sanctuary would reach up to 59 feet, which would allow orcas to swim further and dive deeper than they can in marine park tanks. In contrast, SeaWorld orca tanks average approximately 86 feet by 51 feet, with a depth of 34 feet.
Wow, big difference.
The Whale Sanctuary Project is working to secure final funding with plans to complete the sanctuary this year. And the sanctuary would also include underwater cameras and hydrophones for members of the public to continue to learn about and observe the orcas. Only this time, it would be in a more natural environment. A win for everyone.
Do they offer sleepovers?
We need to push for that.
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Marino and other animal rights activists have urged SeaWorld to partner with them in efforts to build whale sanctuaries, but so far SeaWorld has resisted. SeaWorld told Insider in an email statement, quote, "It would be unconscionable to risk the health and well-being of killer whales at SeaWorld by moving them to a sea pen, especially when killer whales at SeaWorld are living a healthy life in a safe and sound habitat where every need is attended to," end quote. SeaWorld cites concerns about potential hurricanes, oil spills, infectious diseases, and disruption of the ocean ecosystem if the orcas at SeaWorld are moved to a sanctuary. But Marino said that the WSP has worked to address these concerns, including a 3-year environmental assessment, which found that allowing the whales into the region would not harm the ecosystem. They also chose the location in Nova Scotia specifically because of its protection from storm surges during hurricanes, and the team plans to include facilities for the whales to go in the case of an oil spill. In terms of disease, Marino explained the team would conduct a full workup of the orcas' health and immune systems before transferring them, and the whales would have access to veterinary care at the sanctuary. Another factor that SeaWorld wants us to consider in this debate is what the public stands to lose if the orcas leave SeaWorld. The opportunity for people to see orcas up close and for scientists to study and learn about them has led to a greater appreciation of these animals, according to SeaWorld representatives. So what do you think? Should SeaWorld continue housing their last generation of killer whales at their parks, or should they consider transferring them into a more natural environment like a sea pen? I know what I think. You can probably figure out what I think is the right thing to do. But, we all get to decide what we think is best. And there are websites you can go to get more information and find ways to help support your stance, whatever that is. You can check out our show notes and you can see a ton of sources that can help point you in that direction. Or check out the website savedolphins.eii.org. You can also go to SeaWorld.com and find ways to support their conservation efforts. And I do want to close with the fact that overall, I believe SeaWorld is doing great things in the area of conservation. Have they made mistakes? Absolutely. Do I agree with everything they do? Absolutely not. But without SeaWorld's efforts to rehabilitate animals that need help, many marine animal lives would have been lost over the last 50 years. SeaWorld rescue teams help clear away debris and assist with turtle habitat safety. Here in Florida, we have these large birds called sandhill cranes. Did you know that those are one of the most rescued species of the SeaWorld team?
I did know that only because I have a friend that works at Disney's Animal Kingdom, which is in Orlando as well. And they do a tremendous amount of rehabilitation for injured Florida wildlife as well. And the sandhill cranes, because the way they are always by the roadside, they continually get hit by cars. And so I had assumed that SeaWorld also provided that service because they have a lot of birds in their care as well. And so I imagine they help with a lot of those Florida animal rehabilitation.
They absolutely do. I was shocked to learn that because I guess I just never thought of it. Yeah, I thought that was really cool because
Yeah.
these cranes are everywhere and they will not stop for traffic and they are slow moving and they're kind of hard to see. They're the color of the road, but they're these precious little animals. And so I'm so happy to know that.
And they're protected too.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes, I knew that, but I wouldn't have known who to call, and now I do. Now I
There you
know.
go.
Call SeaWorld.
Right.
Did you know that SeaWorld trainers have been known to help straighten the spine of a dolphin with scoliosis?
No, but I was really into Winter, who had her prosthetic tail.
Yes, absolutely. And that was in Tampa. I think I can't
It
remember
was.
the name of that
Yeah.
aquarium, but
Mhm.
we went to
And
see Winter
Clearwater.
before she died. SeaWorld says their emphasis on protecting the environment is still present even in the gift shops, as they exclusively sell sunscreen created with cruelty-free practices and don't contain a common chemical in sunscreens that can damage the ocean when it enters the water supply. SeaWorld does not allow disposable plastic straws at any of their parks. We had to be really careful what we brought for the sleepover. There were certain things that were not allowed for the safety of the animals.
Right.
For every purchase made at a SeaWorld gift shop, 5% of the total gets deposited into the SeaWorld and Busch Gardens Conservation Fund with the intention of supporting conservation groups and efforts around the world. And since its inception in 2003, this fund has contributed $18 million to funding 1,200 global organizations seeking to protect the natural world.
It's significant. It is.
It's significant. So you have to decide what you think is the right thing. I think there's really a lot to learn when weighing the cost versus reward when it comes to what's ethical versus what may be helpful in the long run. I don't think it's a black and white issue. I think I landed in a pretty solid place. Like, I know where I think I am, but I really can see the debate on both sides because honestly, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, what makes the idea of dolphins and killer whales and sharks and all of the above held in captivity? What makes that different from the fact that I won't let my cat play in my backyard when he desperately wants to? You know what I mean? Like, it gets sticky. So I don't know. I had my thoughts, but that's what I came up with about the ins and outs of SeaWorld.
Whew. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot.
It is a lot. And I can tell you this. I don't agree with everything they're doing. I think they have agreed to make some changes that I can be on board with. And I, at this time, I am open to going back to SeaWorld. Absolutely. Do I agree with everything? No, but do I think overall my support can help in the long run? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I'm going to research these sea pens a little bit more. I'm curious, are they completely funded as like a non-for-profit? Like, how is the money going? Like, if SeaWorld were to take their whales there, is that something SeaWorld would have to pay for or sponsor? Or would they be willing to just accept them? These are things that I think would be important to think about too, because there's always kind of the pie in the sky. Yes, this would be great for the animals, but is it genuinely sustainable? Because if that animal gets moved there, what if 3 years from now all of a sudden they don't get enough donations, or they need to overhaul something that's going to cost millions of dollars? You have to really have a lot in place. This can't be like a fly by night operation.
See, and this is why we keep Stephanie around because I'm like, sea pens all the way. And
Well,
Stephanie's like, hold on. You got to stop and think, Cynthia.
but no, and I'm leaning your direction. I think the sea pens are probably the way to go, but I would want to know more about the longevity of them.
I think that's very valid. I mean, these animals will hopefully live for decades from
We
now. So
hope
we need
so.
some longevity.
Exactly. This can't be something where they're transferred there and then whoops, we didn't think about this. Whoops, we've run out of money. So I'd be curious to know, are they even eligible for government grants or something like that? I mean, it's an interesting thought. And I'm sure people much smarter than me have already thought about these things, but I'd be interested to know that as well.
And I probably should have researched that and prepared it in my
No,
episode.
the amount of information you have given us already is a lot. And I think you have given us enough to empower each of us to go and find answers as well.
That's what I think. I think what is right for me may not be right for someone else. And,
Right.
I kind of live my life that way. And so I think do your research and do what's right for you.
Yeah.
And do what's right for the animals, just in general.
Just in general. Just
in life.
Just in life. Just be nice.
Yeah. Just
work hard, play nice.
Yep.
Well, I love it. Okay. Well, a lot of information. I mean, my heart really breaks for these trainers and their families. I mean, I know that they have to know it's a dangerous job they're going into, but you never think that it's actually going to happen or happen to you or your family member.
Right. I did not want to use the movie Blackfish as a source because I know that some of it's skewed and quite frankly, it's been covered enough. So I really didn't want to use it as a
It kind of is a bit of a
source.
lightning rod at this point.
Right.
Not to say they didn't bring up an important issue, but it's a little divisive at this point.
Right. But if you're interested in what some of the former SeaWorld trainers feel,
Sure.
that could be something you could look at.
I think it's a very good data point among many data points.
Exactly. Exactly. And then also keep in mind that, editing, it is a movie, it is a documentary. So there is footage used and there is artistic license and there is editing and they might be talking about one incident while showing footage of another. And, you just editing does a lot. Trust me. Stephanie knows as she is going to edit this episode. Editing really changes a lot, folks.
Yeah, there's no smoke and mirrors over here, but the amount of ums and oops and you knows and I means and
Let me say that again. And
yes, all those things. We
Yeah.
take those out for your listening enjoyment.
Absolutely. That's what I meant. Yeah, nothing tricky over here. Just I sound so much better when I'm edited.
It's just a slight bit of finesse, that's all. Well, this is amazing. Really great work. And I'm, dare I say, very proud of you for wanting to really pick something new. What's a new mystery? What's something new and unknown that we can talk about? And you've definitely brought some new information to me and, empowerment.
Yes,
It's great.
absolutely. And I'll be back next time with something a little more along my true crimey.
No, I love
Wheelhouse.
this one. It's been kind of a nice change.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie loves the statistics and stuff. So I was like, I think
do.
Stephanie will like this. I don't know about everybody else, but I think Stephanie will like to learn some stuff.
There is a good part about being a lovable nerd, a lot of
It's
good qualities
amazing.
about that.
We already said you're like Superwoman.
Oh, stop.
This is why she keeps me around. I keep her around because she edits me well, and she keeps me around because I speak the truth.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. All right, let's stop flattering ourselves and move on to our branch of hope where
Okay.
we can do good for other people.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Now, the true stories we tell on this podcast do provide entertainment and excitement, but we always want to show compassion and respect for the victims and for their loved ones. And the Branch of Hope Foundation allows us to give back to the community, spread awareness about unsolved cases, and hopefully bring a little comfort and hope to those who need it. Each month, we will highlight a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. And this month, we are sponsoring the Amy Rowe Bechtel Scholarship Endowment at Northwest College, which we covered in the first episode of this month. A portion of proceeds from our Patreon and sponsors will go directly to the Amy Rowe Bechtel Scholarship Endowment. If you would like to donate directly to this organization, you can find the contact information on our website or on our social media account. We are simply a podcast leading through words and actions. If you love this episode, love us, or love what we're doing at the Branch of Hope, please like and subscribe and tell someone. You can forward this episode to someone who might like it.
And send us an email at thedarkoakpodcast@gmail.com. We're open to your questions, your comments, and anything else you want to share. For other ways to connect, hop over to thedarkoak.com.
Be sure to follow us to our next episode where we cover the not so mysterious, but definitely unbelievable case of Carl Tanzler and his corpse bride.
That's all I need to know. I'm terrified.
Thanks for listening, Shiver Seekers. You guys rock.
Bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Creep for our amazing music.